everyone. The project I'm sharing with you now is deeply intertwined with the OJA Forum. This 2 years ago, I think it was like the first time we talked about it and collected challenges and questions that we all have in the community. And then last year we presented the first overview of the structure of like how a project like this could look like. So I'm very happy to show you the results for now. I mean, this project is not over. I will go into a bit more detail in the end of my session. But yeah, for now, let's take a quick look where we are what you can expect, and then I'm very much looking forward to feedback, open questions. I also brought some ideas what you could do in the future. But maybe let's start again with a little bit of context for the project. So when we started thinking about this, we started with the questions that the Bertelsmann Stiftung and we had developing multiple OJA projects, and questions like where do we find OJA data, right? Do we scrape it? Do we buy it? Where is OJA data? First question. After getting data, the next question is how to process millions of OJAs. It's a challenge in itself. From there, questions arose like, how can we extract skills from online job ads or occupations or other concepts that are interesting? And in the end, questions arise like, how do we sample OJAs? How do we filter a data set for analysis? How do we deal with duplicates? All right, all those questions that probably most of you have also faced in some form or another. And yeah, so we started by collecting these questions, right? And there are a lot. Just common questions you have when working with online job ad data. Questions collected here from the community, from our projects. And the goal of the how-to paper, as the working title was to collect this knowledge and present it in some form of a knowledge hub, right? That we can all contribute to, and that we can share our knowledge and profit from it. And this was the starting point of the OJA paper. And I would say the hardest challenge of this project was not collecting the knowledge, or because we have so many great experts here, or writing the content. I think the biggest question was really how to structure this OJA analysis process. And how do we bring together all this different information and present it in a coherent way that it makes it easy to find the information, right? That it has a logical structure. And that was something we talked a lot about last year at the OJA Forum. And that's the first time where we presented this idea of the OJA cycle. So let's quickly take a look at the OJA cycle, what it is. So we introduced this heuristic to structure this field of OJA analysis and all the different questions and methods we have. And the general idea here is to follow one job posting from when it's published online on a job board, for example, all the way down until it ends up in some data set in some analysis. And every OJA analysis we do goes through most of some steps until it ends up in an analysis. And not all analyses are the same, right? It's not a linear process, but one job posting will go through some point in this cycle anyways. If it was not done by us, maybe it was like by a data provider who processed already, or we only focus on like a little part of this whole process for OJA analysis by just like developing one algorithm, right? But it's then still part of this whole process from publishing job posting to the finished analysis. And each of these stages, from being published online to the OJA analysis published, comes with different processes, challenges, and methods. And that was kind of the overarching idea. Take this process from start to finish, and then attach like challenges and methods to each point of the state of a job posting. So this is a general overview of how we structured it and how a job posting goes from unstructured data being published online on the job board to ending up in an analysis. And the general idea is first, like the data is collected using different methods and turned into structured data. So we might have some metadata, like when it was published, where it was published, maybe an organization who published the job posting. We have that meta-analysis, and we have it in a structured form so that we could already do some analysis with it. But most of the time when we analyze OJAs, we want to find out more about like a specific concept, like skills or occupations or sectors. So there needs to be like some form of data enrichment that could be extracting skills, for example. And this then like creates something new. It's like a data set with a lot of job postings, with all the indicators we care about. And for the analysis, then we still have to filter the data for our analysis. And part of that is, for example, removing duplicates out of a data set. And maybe assessing the representativity of our sample and thinking about how can we generalize findings from this sample we have generated. All the way up to the last step, then the analysis and the reason why we started this process in the first place. And yeah, this is a heuristic. Of course, there's not one project that fits like this perfectly. But I think it helps to think about like the different stages in OJA analysis. So to give you a bit of an idea of like what you can expect from the how-to guide and what not to expect. So this OJA cycle, this whole project is not a strict linear instruction manual for doing OJA analysis. I think like all the projects we're doing are huge differences between them. It's very hard to find this one process that fits them all, and I think that's not the goal that Bertelsmann and the BIP wanted to pursue here. It's also not an in-depth technical session of data science and machine learning methods. So you will not find a discussion whether decision trees are better than neural networks for predicting something. So this is not the goal here. It's more a high-level overview of this process and the different things we as researchers have to think about when doing OJA analysis. And this is, for example, highlighting the implicit and explicit decisions in the OJA analysis. And I think that's a very common theme that we have been discussing in all the OJA forums so far, that are always this decision, those trade-offs you have to make. And hopefully this OJA guide will make them explicit, these decisions we make, and give a little bit of guidance of how to think about these decisions. It should also be an overview over different approaches in OJA analysis, right? There's not this one method to do something. There's not the one silver bullet to solve a problem. There are different approaches for different goals, and I wanted to highlight as many of them as possible. And last but not least, it should be a way to offer good practices and some lessons learned from the OJA community, and highlight the experts we have in this community and the work they're doing. So with that being said, you can find the project under this link or with this QR code here. It's already online. It's still in beta. We will change a couple of things in the future, but you can see the updated project here. Quick word about like how we structured this. We didn't want to write like one just like report, like a static report, because this is a very dynamic topic. So many people can contribute to it, so it should be like a living document that will also develop over time, and can be curated and made better with the help of the community. So we chose this format of like a online knowledge base. So in this case, we used Gitbook for it, which is a tool that turns Markdown documents into a well-structured, easily searchable documentation, basically, of this process. All the content and everything here will be published on an open source license. Will also be available on GitLab or GitHub when we publish it. So yeah, feel free to use it in new projects as well. A quick word about the structure of the project, how to navigate it. So there are a couple of ways you can interact with the project. That was the goal, to make it as non-linear as possible, to create some serendipity that you can find like other sections in the project easily. We have a lot of backlinks between the sections. But overall, there are like, I think I would say like 3 ways to search for information. The first one would be to just like go through the lifecycle stages, basically, where we organize the methods and challenges. You also get an overview over all challenges. So if you're facing like one specific problem, you might find the challenge here. Or if you're interested more in specific methods, we have this overview methods tab to find a collection of all the methods in the paper. And then, of course, there's like a search bar, which is quite well implemented in Gitbook to some version of semantic search to find relevant context for your questions. And a couple of words about the content. It's not a linear report, so we also had some freedom to include some different techniques, different different context boxes, for example. So we have some multimedia content, so all the videos that were published for the OJA forums over the last couple of years, we try to include them in the OJA process where it seems fitting. We have community contributions highlighted as these quote blocks. So over the last couple of months, we had some feedback iterations, and we got a lot of more feedback and some other contributions that we can highlight like this. Then we have some hints and tips. I will go into a bit more detail in a second. And lastly, we can also use it to highlight resources, like here, for example, a publicly available transformer model for German job ad data. Yeah, and with that, so we have a quick look at the project itself. So I can tell you a bit more about like the challenges we faced when structuring a project and like how we try to approach them. Yeah, so now we are here on the landing page. Now we're on the landing page. With some information about the project. And of course, all the people that helped us so far with feedback, with contributions. Thank you very much again for your very valuable input at this occasion again. Yeah, but let's maybe first look at like one very specific challenge, which I think is very interesting in the way it folds into this whole OJA process, and that's the problem of deduplication. Duplicates in OJAs is a very common challenge. How do we identify them? How do we deal with them? And the question from the beginning was, where would this fit in like an OJA cycle in the process? Right? And it touches so many different things that we also decided to separate it into like the different phases where it is relevant. And the first phase where duplicates are relevant is in the data collection phase, because the first step would be to understand where duplicates come from and how the data collection process influences the generation of duplicates in our data sets. So here you would, for example, look at OJA landscaping as a method to understand the OJA market better and to understand how and where job postings are published. The second stage where the deduplication is relevant is in the data enrichment step. And here we have a whole section on identifying duplicates. And this was the decision to separate the identification of duplicates from the step of removing duplicates. But in a way, identifying duplicates is an enrichment step, because what we do when we try to find duplicates is not that we're filtering the data already, but rather we're attaching some new indicator to our data to indicate, okay, this posting relates to this other posting. We do that, for example, by adding an indicator like a job ID that lets us easily indicate postings that relate to the same job. And this is why identifying duplicates and the methods involved are here under data enrichment and not under dataset curation. But if we go to dataset curation, we find then the section on deduplication, which is we are now at the step where we want to prepare our data set for analysis. And so here we collected some strategies on how to deal with duplicates, which is a decision that is very specific to the analysis you want to do. Right? Because in some cases, you might even want to analyze the duplicates themselves, right, without removing them. So this is a different process from identifying duplicates. Yeah, this was just one example of like how we structured the project. Maybe another thing we can quickly take a look at is the extraction methods. And there we first have to look at the data enrichment. Here in data enrichment, we look at how we can extract like interesting concepts, not only duplicates, but also normalizing job titles, extracting skills. So those concepts that a lot of us are interested in, where there's already a lot of experience on how to do it. That's all collected here. But the methods, so like the concrete data processing methods we use are quite similar between all of these different concepts, right? You might use similar methods for extracting job titles to extracting skills. So that's why we pulled them out of here and have our own section on extraction methods, where we give an overview over the methods that we usually employ for these tasks, like document classification, token classification, unsupervised classification, and so on. And yeah, here is another challenge quite visible. And the question was, how deep should we go with the content? Right? Should we just give an overview, or should we explain these methods in depth? And I think it's very hard to make everyone happy here. So it's kind of like a middle ground. So introducing the concepts without going too much into detail. But in the future, this could be a point where we add more context and more practical resources to get people started. I think that was a very valuable input we got in the feedback stage. And the last thing I quickly want to highlight are these boxes here. These are hints and tips. So I tried while writing the OJA paper not to give any clear cutoff points for metrics. For example, like your precision should be that high or your recoil should be that high. Because I think it's very specific to the project and the challenges you face. There's not really a point in having like some general cutoff points where you consider metric good or bad. Right, so I try to leave it as open as possible, like which approaches you could use. But still, like from our experience, I think there were like some interesting things that were worth sharing, and we did it by including them in these hint boxes. Like you can see that, for example, in the section about developing a gold standard, right? One question I get quite often is the question, how many documents do we need in our gold standard to do a proper evaluation? And it's very hard to say. It's very specific to the project you're doing. So here just listed some of the questions that we might ask to determine how many documents we need in our gold standard in our evaluation data set. But as always, you're all invited to participate here and bring in your own experience, anecdotes, and tips, and we can include them very easily using these quote boxes. Here, for example, a very valuable comment from Kai on semantic modeling, and I think that's a very good and easy way to include content from all of you as well. And I've no idea how I'm with the time, but I think I'll get to the end. Some open, some to-dos that are still open, or some ideas what we could do in the future content-wise here. The first thing I already mentioned, add practical resources for the methods part. So maybe some Python, some R libraries that are helpful for some methods to so that people can easily get started with that. So I think this was a wish by the community. One section that's missing is the section on reporting standards. So on model cards, what should we make transparent about our models? How should we report it? What standards are out there? So this is the work in progress. Then we are always looking for new projects and projects that you're doing that are not papers, but maybe like an online website or some online resources or models or libraries you've created. We are very happy to share them through this project as well. Some benchmarks for the enrichment task. By benchmark, I don't really mean like, again, some cutoffs, but like some experience from the community. We already have that for the text segmentation, for example, very helpful to see like here 4 or 5 studies and they achieved the following results that can give you an indicator of like how hard or easy a specific task is, and some insights into what methods and approaches they used. Then one open question, if there should be a section on regulatory context. I think the OJA paper focuses very much on this, like very research focused, very analysis focused, but some regulatory context now with the EU AI Act, for example, could be relevant. As labor market is one of the domains that is mentioned there quite often. So might be valuable to add some context there as well. And same on the side for the analysis. And we haven't included too much content on like time series analysis, for example, or clustering or things like that, because they are very specific to individual projects that you are doing, right? But it still might be very helpful to collect some best practices here, some ideas of what other people are doing, maybe discuss bias in specific analyses as well to give to raise some more awareness for the for these challenges we have with online job ad data in the analysis process, data visualization, and so on. But it depends really what the demand is there for, what kind of content. So also feel free to give feedback here. And before we publish it, we'll also add a section on how to contribute. So this project can grow over time, and we can maintain it. And will hopefully be helpful for quite some time. Yeah, with that, here's my email address for feedback, any contributions you might want to add. And for now, thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to your feedback, to your questions and the discussion.